Hey, what's going on everyone? So a long time ago, I purpled Emperor. With his Lost Chapter and LD having arrived, he's got an improvement in his damage efficiency. If you're interested in what David Bowie does and what he offers to a team, stick around and find out. Emperor is a non-elemental magic attacker who has good on-turn damage via his skills and enhanced basic attacks, but also offers good off-turn damage via his trap debuffs, improving his damage output in the same amount of counted turns. His skill 1 is Beckoning Blast and Flare combo, 4 single target attacks into an HP hit. Onto the enemy, it applies Beckoning Blast, which lasts 1 turn and as a debuff lowers enemy defense. When activated, it repeats the brave hits at a lower potency, applies a speed down, and refunds 20% of the HP damage dealt. The skill also grants Emperor Thirst for Dominion, which raises his attack, max bravery, and lowers enemy speed. It also grants him access to enhanced basic attacks, with his Brave Plus gaining another hit and his HP Plus gaining a hit entirely. His skill 2 is Thundercrest and Stygian Swell, 4 group hits that deal split HP damage to all enemies. Onto the main target, it applies Thundercrest, which lasts 2 turns and also lowers defense. When the trap triggers, it again does 4 group hits, but the HP damage is changed to deal 50% splash damage to non-targets instead, and also refunds 20% of the HP damage dealt. His EX is Dreary Cell and Starfall. At base, 4 group hits that deal split HP damage to all enemies. However, before the brave attacks, it'll actually trigger any other traps already on the primary target, which is pretty nice when you have a friend Emperor. Not only does it trigger all traps, but it also reapplies Beckoning Blast and Thundercrest, and the EX's trap Dreary Cell as 1-turn debuffs to the main target. Dreary Cell as a debuff also lowers defense, and when triggered, deals 2 group hits that ignore defense, deal split HP damage, again refunds 20% of the HP damage dealt, and delays the primary target by 1 turn. The EX cast also grants Emperor a new buff in Hell Power, which raises his max bravery and lowers enemy speed. EX Plus improves his damage across the board, with an improved EX cast and better basic attacks. Realization improves the strength of the EX cast, as well as giving it some more overflow, good since it's a group attack. 1 Ingot applies his traps to all targets on EX cast, as well as starting him off with his 2 unique buffs and letting the EX cast refresh both of them. 2 Ingots is a stat boost, giving Emperor much needed attack and more bravery to fill, especially against a group, and also further enhances his basic attacks while Thirst for Dominion is active. His Brave 2 Plus gets slightly stronger, while its HP 2 Plus gains slight overflow. 3 Ingots improves both the EX cast and Dreary Cell with 2 more hits, strength, and overflow, giving Starfall 6 hits and Dreary Cell 4 hits. His LD gives him Hellish Gale, which first triggers all 3 of his traps on the main target whether or not they have the debuff active, and then does 8 group hits with 50% splash HP damage. It buffs him with Subjugation Scheme, which raises his attack, initial bravery, overflow, and grants him Brave Regen, which is really handy since his Brave Shave without any traps isn't the best. The LD passive raises his attack, as well as granting him Brave and HP 3+ variants with Subjugation Scheme active. These have 1 more hit compared to his 2+ versions from his EX+, but more importantly, trigger and preserve any active traps on the target before doing their own brave hits, greatly improving his on-turn damage while also improving his longevity and preserving his off-turn damage. Emperor was a rather strong character on his first release. He and Ultimecia were the first 2 real Magic EX+ units available, and it was highly advised to get at least one of them to get you through that period of the game. After Emperor came Golbez EX+, who was strong and had good longevity, but does suffer from being locked to Dark and having 2 attack types, so if you couldn't land his Imperil, you were out of luck. Despite having low-ish hit counts on all of his skills, his traps scale well with buffs and HP damage increase, improving his overall damage within approximately the same amount of counted party turns, not to mention the off-turn Brave Shave they provide. At this point in Japan, Emperor has gotten his burst as the antagonist of Final Fantasy II, and he also got probably the smallest rework I've ever seen, as well as his LD extension, so here's what he has in store for him. For the rework, he gets 1 more use of his skill 1 and a stronger cast of it, with more overflow and higher turn rate. He gets 2 more uses of his skill 2, as well as the increased turn rate, but that's it for the rework. His LD extension is also a bit minimal. The cast itself keeps the hit count, but gains more strength and an HP attack after the first 3 hits, improving its efficiency especially against multiple targets. It improves Subjugation Scheme with a longer duration, more attack, and an effect that keeps Emperor's bravery from falling below 10% of maximum, mostly benefiting his LD cast, his EX cast, and his HP 3+, since they either have no or very little brave return. Lastly, there's his burst, and if you guessed it adds another trap, you'd be right. The finisher itself is 15 group hits that deal total HP damage. The trap it applies is 5 group hits that ignore defense and also deal total HP damage, delay all targets by 1 turn, lasts 1 turn, and refunds 10% of the HP damage dealt. This trap can only be triggered by expiring. The burst field effect focuses more on brave damage, as it increases brave damage done and the brave damage limit, and gives the whole party 20% brave refund. Emperor's burst phase, however, is kinda nutty, since his HP 3+ is super strong in it due to activating all 3 traps, which damages all enemies and also delays the main target. Depending on how you choose to handle the burst phase, you can get up to 21 HP attacks on the main target in your 5 turns of action if you're going in with all 3 traps already on it, with the cherry on top being 5 turns of delay for that target. So I guess the question that may still be on your mind is Emperor good? Honestly, he is good. It's just not simple to get maximum use out of the extra damage his LD buff gives him. Before his LD, obviously that didn't matter, but now that LDs are part of building a unit, it's best to consider how they change a unit's playstyle, if they do, to get better performance. In an ideal scenario, you'll be able to get off at least 1 extra trigger of his traps before they expire naturally. The issue with that is Emperor only has delay from 1 trap, his EX trap, and no forms of instant turns. His future rework alleviates this a bit thanks to a higher turn rate, but it doesn't totally fix the issue. To make best use out of his LD, you'd want to make sure he can get at least 1 more turn ahead of an enemy with the trap on them, either via delay or teammate turn manipulation. This is not that easy in a group and is overall more doable with Thundercrest, not quite as doable with Beckoning Blast and Dreary Cell. Obviously, being able to get repeat triggers of all 3 traps would be the goal, and is part of the reason he can solo Dimensions End Entropy 6, but in normal practice, it's not quite as easy to set up. So as you can imagine, there's not a lot of characters who can really compare to Emperor. Off-turn damage isn't the same as follow-up damage, since it can be used to shave enemies after their turn has already happened. There are counter characters such as Galoof and 8, and then there's Trey, who is a trap-based character of a different style, not having any debuff-based traps until he gets his own LD. Off-turn HP damage is a niche in this game that isn't utilized very heavily, at least not yet, and as a translation of Emperor's trap-based moveset from the other Dissidia games, it leaves him unique enough that at this point in time, there just isn't really anyone who compares to him well. So yeah, that's Purple Emperor. While the boost he gets from his LD is good, it's not as plug and play as other LDs where you get more damage and a buff and that's the extent of it. It asks for debuff management, turn planning, and potentially some turn manipulation if you really want to maximize what you get out of it. Emperor comes back again with his burst for Divine Rama, and the LD on the banner opposite him is Celeste, who gets a rework at that time as well. So managing his LD now would ensure that you have a strong boosted character for that farm. You'll also be able to try and get other units around his burst period, namely Celeste, Aerith, Eldnarsh, and Aranea. If you like this breakdown of Emperor's kit and want to see others like it or other Opera Omni content, stick around, subscribe, and check out the playlist. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again.